for this great panel that is about a really crucial topic in the current geopolitical context, so environment and energy. And for this panel, I am with 4 experts that I will ask them to introduce them to you before we go into the content of this panel. So please, could you introduce yourself? I will start with Pierre Marro.
Thanks, Faustine. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Pierre Marro. I work for the European Commission in the DG Connect, which is in charge of most of the digital files within the Commission. I'm in a unit which was dealing with digital innovation and blockchain. Now we have a reorganization and we are called Digital Market, but we are still continuing our activities on blockchain. So I'm more in charge of what we call the European Blockchain Partnership, which is a partnership regrouping all the member states, plus Norway, Liechtenstein, and Ukraine is now associated also to this partnership. And we are building a public blockchain infrastructure to serve at first cross-border public services.
Thank you, Pierre. On your right, Frédéric Montagnon.
So thank you for having me today. I'm Frédéric Montagnon. I'm an engineer turned into an entrepreneur 20 years ago. I have a created company in the field of media and advertising before I jump into the decentralized ecosystem almost 12 years ago. And I had 3 experience so far. One, I built a crypto exchange that I sold some years ago. Then a bridge between Ethereum and Tezos, which are two ecosystems. And 5 years ago, I created a project called Arianee, and we help brands to issue digital passport for real products. So we work with almost all the groups who are in the luxury industry, and with fashion brands as well. And we help them to recreate a relation with their customer without intermediaries and with no personal data. And I'm going to give you some example in this chat, but it's real application of decentralized technology to help brands and users regain control over their data online.
Cool, thanks. Hey everybody, I'm Alex. I work at an organization called KlimaDAO. So we're a decentralized autonomous organization on the Polygon blockchain. And our mission is really thinking about how we can integrate Web3 and DeFi with the voluntary carbon market. So the voluntary carbon market is a market that facilitates the trade and consumption of carbon credits, an environmental commodity, a digitally native environmental commodity. And so we're trying to sort of hook these markets up and see how, by applying Web3 principles, we can actually improve the conditions of the voluntary carbon market itself, help it become more efficient, and help it kind of fulfill its role in closing our emissions gap between our current trajectory for mid-century emissions and where we should be if we actually want to achieve a net zero society. So yeah, that's KlimaDAO. I'll pass it on.
Thank you. Well, my name is Anna. I had a fireside chat just now, so most of you know me now. I am the CEO of Climate Collective, which is a innovation network that supports Web3, so blockchain native companies working on climate technologies and climate solutions, as well as crowding in Web2 companies, climate tech companies, to support them creating digitally native environmental assets like carbon credits, or hopefully in the future biodiversity credits and other type of environmental assets.
Thank you, everyone. And to finish, so I'm Faustine Fleuret. For those who were not here yesterday afternoon, I'm president of ADAN, which is a professional body that is federating and representing the crypto industry in France and in Europe. So thank you, everyone, for being there. We are talking about crypto and environment and energy. So we hear a lot of preconceived ideas about the environmental impact of blockchain technologies and crypto assets. So I think the first question to ask is a popular statement that crypto assets are highly energy consuming actually true? What can you say about that? So maybe, Pierre, you want to start with that?
Well, before to let my colleagues to perhaps go in a bit more in the technology consideration, I would like to say that beyond this statement, there is a big concern within the Commission, but also within the member state as part of the government, but also I guess amongst different stakeholders, even the citizen, about yes, those crypto asset technology or blockchain are not something good for the climate or for the energy consumption. I will not inform you that we are now in a specific period where the energy crisis is at a paroxysm, and of course all those questions take another relief in the current context. So I don't want to state that blockchain is, let's say, at the antithesis of energy efficiency or climate. I don't think it myself, but I can witness the fact that in all the spheres of discussion that we have within the Commission or with stakeholders, with member states, the question is high on the agenda.
So actually, maybe I can for you. The subject is quite difficult because there are lots of different technologies. It's like comparing different type of cars or automotive in general. So you have supercars, which are extremely energy consuming, and other cars who are not. In the blockchain area, it's exactly the same. And for every single technology we have, there is potentially a need or not. The problem with energy consumption when it comes to blockchain is that most of the time it's relating to what we call proof of work, which is the mechanism of Bitcoin. But most of the applications are not built on top of Bitcoin. Most of the applications that we have at scale are built on other chains, which are more agile in terms of scalability, which offers other possibilities. And it really depends what we are talking about. If we are talking about creating a new currency that is not sensitive to censorship, yes, of course, Bitcoin is extremely, in terms of energy consumption, it's really high. But when you try to create an application for industries, you will not choose probably this kind of mechanism. You will not choose this kind of architecture. And as an example, if I look at what we do at Arianee, our digital assets, so everything we create, rely onto blockchain that doesn't consume a lot. The whole activity we have today is the equivalent of the consumption of 1% per year, not about a million of servers all around the world. So there is a lot of different technologies possible. It really fits or not some needs. And I think that now the most of the market has understood that yes, of course, you have to be really careful when you choose the technology you work with. At our level, we work with very premium brands, and they are very careful about the energy consumption of every single system they use, every single third party they use, every single project they roll out. So, of course, not all the blockchain are highly energy consuming.
So maybe, Alex, you wanted to add some interesting figures about proof of work, proof of stake. Sorry, I want to complete what Frédéric just said.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Not all blockchains are created equal, right? Each one's unique, each one's different. So I would agree with everything you say, and I would say that there's a lot of variability within the proof of stake systems, as well as previously in the proof of work systems. There was a lot of variability in terms of the amount of actual energy they consumed. You can have a proof of stake network, which is essentially 10 validators, 10 node validators, and would require essentially 10 computers to run it. And meanwhile, you can have a very large proof of stake network, which is integrated or interacting with Ethereum or other networks. And so it requires a lot of computers to run. And then it also pre-merge was also dependent on the Ethereum's proof of work consensus mechanism. So within the proof of stake conversation, you have very, very small energy consumption, very small carbon footprints, all the way up to moderately high carbon footprints. We're talking of the order of a number of tons per year in terms of carbon emissions from smaller proof of stake networks up to maybe tens of tons, hundreds of tons for larger proof of stake networks. And I think the same is true with proof of work when Ethereum was on proof of work. Bitcoin is a much larger network than Ethereum. You're required to put more energy in to mine a block on Bitcoin, and therefore Bitcoin was consuming more energy. You can almost visualize that, right? When you look at a graphics card required to mine an Ethereum block compared with the ASIC mining rigs that you're required to mine a Bitcoin block, that they're physically different, right? The Bitcoin mining block is the ASIC is bigger, so Bitcoin requires more. So again, there was variability in the proof of work conversation. So I think when we have this conversation, we need to bear in mind that we need to look at each individual blockchain and understand, okay, what actual infrastructure is being used here, and therefore what is the actual energy load. I think we can visualize this room. So what could this room do for us if we wanted to participate in a blockchain network? So in this room, you could run 100 node validators from computers. You could secure an entire proof of stake network. It wouldn't be very decentralized, but you could do it. Whereas, if you wanted to secure the Bitcoin network and you filled this room up with ASIC mining rigs, you'd be 1,000th of the Bitcoin network. It's a 1 in 10,000th part of the Bitcoin network. You really wouldn't be influencing the infrastructure that much. So just trying to visualize the kind of scale and the variability of the amount of energy required to mine a block or validate a network is really quite significant. So yeah, always have the nuance, always try and understand the fundamental infrastructure, and from there, once we've done that, I think we can have a proper conversation about the actual energy demand of different networks.
Thank you, Alex. Anna, do you agree with what has been said? Would you like to complete?
Yeah, there's not that much to add. I think these are really good points. I guess from myself, coming from 15 plus year career in climate and environmental protection, I was considering going into blockchain initially before Ethereum had done their merge and changed from proof of work to proof of stake was a bit concerning, but I feel really good about the change that they've done. And I think we could all put pressure on Bitcoin to kind of go the same direction. I don't know if that's technically possible, but and to your point, like working at Facebook before, like not all data centers are made the same. Not all data centers are connected to the same renewables grids. So there's a lot of Web 2 companies and networks that have pretty significant carbon footprints as well. And I think the role of regulators and other sort of technology pioneers is to encourage all of them to consider their footprints and strive towards more decarbonization.
Thank you. So, sorry, we understand that the debate about the environmental impact of crypto assets is much more complex than just saying crypto assets pollute and consume too much energy. So based on that, can we go maybe further, and can we assume that finally crypto and the fight against the climate change can be compatible? Could you maybe share use cases that can illustrate that crypto and sustainability are actually compatible? Maybe Frédéric, would you like to start?
Yes, of course. I take the example of what I know. So we work with brands, and how they use Web3 technologies and how they use digital assets is to create an identity for real products. So what we call a digital product passport. The reason why they do that is because, of course, you will have the opportunity to show some information about the authenticity of the product. Of course, it's a proof of ownership for a product. And I take a very easy example. If you buy a Breitling or Vacheron Constantin watch just after the conference, you will get the real watch. You will get also an NFT that represents the ownership of this watch, and you will store it into a wallet, into your phone, and that is the contact and your communication channel with the brands. So it's the opportunity to, as an example, have the access to the warranty of the product, but also all the information that are needed to repair the product and to recycle the product. And when it comes to linking that to a circular economy and to impact, the ability all along the life of the product to store somewhere information about how you will enhance the life cycle of the product is definitely a way to enhance the circularity of the chain. I take the example of fabrics. When you have to recycle some I don't know, a t-shirt, it's extremely hard at the end of the life of the t-shirt to make the difference between cotton and synthetic materials. And at the end of the day, generally speaking, there is no recycling technology that can be both. So you have to be able to assess what is what and to adapt the process you are using. If you don't have this information, it's just impossible. So you just burn what should be recycled. So in this context, having a digital passport that contains the information with all the services and all the information and the relation you have with the brands on your mobile and the ability to sustain over time the storage of this information definitely helps on that. That's one of the examples. Yeah.
Thank you, Frédéric. Alex, I think that KlimaDAO is also related to sustainability. What can you say about your project?
Yeah, I guess first of all, I should say we're on the Polygon blockchain. So we weren't on Ethereum mainnet pre-merge. So our own carbon footprint is not too significant. We think maybe 10 tons was our carbon footprint, just to get that one out there. So as I said at the beginning, KlimaDAO is trying to develop infrastructure that can help scale the voluntary carbon markets using Web3 and DeFi. And to kind of talk about our solutions, I guess I should contextualize the market itself. The voluntary carbon market's been around for about 20 years. The supply chain is kind of made up on the supply side of climate projects, pro-climate projects across the globe that are doing positive environmental work. So it could be the development of renewable energy projects, could be the development of reforestation, afforestation projects, or forest protection projects, etc. There's a lot of different types of projects, and these projects are able to issue carbon credits if they go through certain processes that different carbon standards have established. And once these carbon credits are issued, they can be traded through the market, and then ultimately they can be consumed. The consumption of them is referred to as carbon offsetting. So if you see that, get a flight and you do your carbon offset, what you're doing is you're purchasing a carbon credit and you're removing it from the market, and that gives you a claim on the environmental benefit. Anyway, there's a lot of research that talks about some of the supply side problems with the market, but also the demand side problems with the market. And a lot of these demand side problems are to do with the kind of nature of the trading of carbon credits. At the moment, they're sort of traded via sort of over-the-counter deals through carbon brokers or through retailers. And this means that if you are a consumer of carbon credits because you want to offset your emissions, you're essentially a price taker. You don't have an understanding of kind of what's going on in the market. You don't really understand the price of a carbon credit. You sometimes might not even be able to understand some of the characteristics of the credit. For example, where in the world it's been originated from, what vintage year it was, etc. So it's an opaque market. And obviously Web3 and DeFi, one of the things that it does do if it's built on a public blockchain is that it's all transparent and it's all permissionless. And so a few of the really important pieces of infrastructure that we've built at KlimaDAO, the first is the development or the utilization of liquidity pools we use a platform called SushiSwap. And over the past year or so, we've been building up liquidity of carbon credits or tokenized carbon credits within our ecosystem. This is really important because in the kind of off-chain market, it can be quite difficult to source large orders from different brokers. It's a bit of a process. You might not be getting the right price, etc. It's a bit cumbersome. So the first kind of idea is to build liquidity on chain so people can come into these liquidity pools at quite large scales. We've got about 25 million tokenized carbon credits within our ecosystem, so we can certainly service almost all types of demand for carbon credits. So that's kind of step one, the development of liquidity pools. And then step two is the development of the kind of permissionless offsetting infrastructure. And why this is important is because the purpose of carbon credits isn't to trade them within liquidity pools or through the market or whatever, speculate on them or churn them around the market. The purpose of carbon credits is to actually consume them, to offset them. So it's all well and good developing liquidity, but if you can't use them, well, then kind of what's the point? So through our permissionless offsetting infrastructure, anybody can now go in and use the infrastructure to offset their carbon emissions. This is a much different process in the off-chain market, where you either kind of have to pay a service fee to a retailer or go direct via a broker. Again, that's got a cost. It takes time, 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months. You never know. So we think this is a really important step forward for the market. We think it's quite powerful, actually. You can offset using our infrastructure within 30 seconds if you've got a MetaMask. If you haven't got a MetaMask, maybe it'll take you 3 days. But in principle, it's quite quick. But the third and the really important piece is the development of our kind of infrastructure, our data layer, which essentially looks at what's happening on the blockchain, and it pulls all that data and it gives it on a dashboard to anyone who's interested in the market. Historically, within the carbon markets, you can get data. You have to pay for the data, and then when you do get it, it's self-reported data and it's historic data. So by the time you access it, it might be 3 months out of date. It's probably 12 months out of date.
Recording in progress.
There's not enough data for people to be understanding what's going on in the market. And so by having a public blockchain that we can read immediately every 10 seconds and update that, we can inform the market as to what's actually happening. What are the carbon credits trading at, and what are the price of the carbon credits trading at in a liquidity pool? What are the attributes of these carbon credits, et cetera, et cetera. So we think that's really powerful. And, I would just say that, again, the purpose of the carbon markets is ultimately to try and close this emissions gap, right? It's got a use. It's to invest in the climate, in the planet. And so when the market isn't working, and evidence would suggest it's not working to that end, because there's a market failure, because there's an asymmetric market, we think it needs intervention. And that's kind of why we're developing this infrastructure, to try and fix these market failures, to try and make the market more symmetrical and essentially be more efficient and scale up. So I hope that's an interesting use case for how Web3 and crypto can actually be used to do some good. Granted, there is a carbon footprint, particularly proof of work. Ethereum's got a legacy carbon footprint, we think, of about 18 million tons. So it's significant, but there's good things happening.
Thank you, Alex. And now, do you have use cases that you would like to share with the audience?
Yeah, I feel like we've kind of pre-compared notes here. But I think a lot of the Web3 companies that we represent in the Climate Collective are building on the work that KlimaDAO ignited. I would say you guys are definitely the early ones that started this thinking, and has sort of created an rich ecosystem of follow-on companies that are tweaking the model, taking a piece of it, or kind of innovating across the carbon markets value chain. Recognizing this is a European audience, the voluntary carbon market is not something that I think Europeans think about day to day. It's a little more prevalent in the US, where a lot of large publicly traded companies are making these net zero commitments. And in many cases, they use the voluntary carbon market to offset some of the emissions they can't address themselves. So taking it a step beyond the voluntary carbon market, I would say, if we think of climate finance, I didn't even know the numbers, but we need like triple or quadruple or whatever we need to do, increase climate finance, right, to get to a decarbonization or protection of biodiversity that is needed for us to sustain. I think 1.5 goal it's not even a goal. We need to get to 1.5. The goal should be to get to zero temperature change, and I think we've lost that race. But point is more, voluntary carbon markets and the European emissions trading system is the only market mechanisms that we have today that are trying to address this and unlock finance for these actions. I think they should be the start. We should move beyond and talk about this idea of environmental assets. I'm fascinated by the digital passport idea that you're creating to gather all this information about products and about actions that we all do, so we can better account for what the emissions we are creating and how we then need to compensate for it in an accurate way. I think another really exciting use case, so while I'm spending most of my time working on the voluntary carbon market, I would say another really exciting use case is this idea of direct payments for ecosystem services. So I think in 1992, UNFCCC for the first time paid a country, Costa Rica, I'm pretty sure it was Costa Rica, to protect some of their biodiversity. I think many of us would be very happy to contribute funds to protect the Amazon, which we all essentially depend on for survival, or support energy security or energy efficiency investments in Europe to make sure that all of our neighbors make it through the winter. But are we just going to send money into sort of through an NGO maybe on a crowdfunding campaign that doesn't feel particularly transparent and impactful? Certainly not for a private company if they want to kind of track their impact. So again, this is where I think blockchain as a transparent public ledger is so impactful, where you can record both the impact that you're having, so you can record the need for finance and the need for offsets, but you can also track the project and its actual impact. How good is this for the planet? What are the carbon emissions that are being saved by protecting this part of the Amazon? So with your watch example, let's say that I want to protect part of the Amazon. I can't get the watch, right? I can't have the physical watch. Or maybe I could go there and visit the trees perhaps, but that seems counterintuitive to what we're trying to get to. But I can have a digital representation of the part that I'm protecting. And having a digital representation on a ledger that can't be tampered with, I can integrate other digital technologies like satellite imagery or machine learning, so I can track what the wildlife that is living in this part of the Amazon that I'm trying to protect. I can track the canopy growth of the biomass, the trees that are growing there. I could have a connection to the community that lives there, and maybe I can send direct payments using digital wallets, so that I can support them in their livelihoods, because they are also needed to protect this space. Speaking with some of you in the audience during lunch break, we did highlight that there's still a challenge in the off-ramping. So while it's really impactful that we can use blockchain to pay for ecosystem services directly to communities, we need to still do a little bit more work on off-ramping so that they receive, if it's Celo tokens they receive, they can off-ramp it and use it in their local currency. That said, mobile money was the same idea, and they've made a really good innovations in getting mobile money to be useful in the local economy. So I don't think that's impossible. I think that's just kind of the next step of where we need to go.
Really interesting use cases. Let's talk about mining, maybe because it's always depicted as highly energy consuming and then unsustainable. Do you think that mining could be leveraged in the case of the energy transition? Maybe Alex, do you have an idea about that?
Yeah, I think first of all, mining now, we should define it, right? Mining is now primarily or almost exclusively just for Bitcoin, given that we've had the merge. I guess the two angles here. There's, when you're in the environmental space, there's this concept called the emissions hierarchy, which is you should follow this process before you achieve carbon neutrality. The idea is that you measure your emissions, and then you avoid emissions where possible, and then you take mitigation actions. So that could be, in the case of mining, that could be using renewable sources as the electricity source, or if there's waste heat from a larger installation, can you use that waste heat to heat your home and be more efficient. And then the final step is compensation measures or offsetting. So they can use KlimaDAO, of course, to do that. So I think, in general, miners should be encouraged to follow this, as any other economic activity or sector that's creating carbon emissions should be. But it's easier said than done, right? Miners, we don't really know who they are or where they are. Naturally, they're distributed, spatially distributed. So there's a big job to try and really understand, who's doing it, so that conversation can be had with them. So I think people who have influence within the Bitcoin space should hopefully be having that conversation. But then there's a broader, there's a higher level conversation, right, about the kind of energy system as a whole and energy economics as a whole, and just trying to understand what role, if in Europe, for example, there is a significant proportion of Bitcoin mining happening, okay, how much does that represent in terms of a load on the energy system? How flexible is that load on the energy system? What are the benefits of that load on the energy system, or what are the negative aspects of that load on the energy system? I know we see a lot of sort of conversations, particularly in the US at the moment, around how Bitcoin can be used as a flexible load, as a demand aggregator to build flexibility into the system, and that can enable digitization of the energy system, etc. So there could be some it could play an important role in some ways, but I think at the moment it sounds like we're still trying to define where's it happening, how can we control it, and how can we control it, etc. So I think that the conversation is still quite young, personally. But yeah.
Does anyone want to add something on this question? Otherwise, we can go to the next one.
Maybe just one comment on that.
Yeah, sure.
Not only for mining, but we have to compare with other systems. So when we look at the energy consumption of a blockchain, or whether it's a proof of work, whether it's a proof of stake or whatever, we have to compare with some things that already exist. And it's possible that most of the time it's easier to deploy and to maintain a system, a decentralized system, rather than a centralized one. It depends what you have to secure. If you have to secure a lot of value, you will have to invest a lot into security and compliance. And investing into compliance is to make sure that the system by itself will not be gamed by anyone. And that has a cost. That has a cost in terms of resources, energy, and so on and so forth. So it's perhaps difficult to make this comparison, but it's not just energy consumption on top of what already exists, but it can replace really elegantly some system. And concerning what we do and what I do with Arianee, definitely it's easier to create this system into a decentralized network, and in terms of energy consumption, it will be lower than having to comply with every single rule in terms of private personal data. So today, when you have a global business, you need to comply with regulation all over the world, which means that you need to store your data in Europe, the data for your European customer in Europe. You have to do the same in the United States. You have to do the same in Japan, and so on and so forth. At the end of the day, it's extremely complex to have a system with different entities, different rules, and to have to secure all the system. So what we do today is we have a lower energy consumption because it really relies on a few servers, rather than if we had to buy a lot of servers and units into the cloud to operate the same system in a centralized way.
But perhaps if I can add something here, because the previous part of the discussion identified Bitcoin, and indeed with the merge, now we have one single big elephant in the room, and what we have to do with it. So it's a bit the question that we have now, at least when I made reference earlier to the debate that we had within the Commission, but also within the member state, is that, okay, should we ban, some voice say, should we ban Bitcoin because, and now it's even more, the question is more acute with the merge of Ethereum. So what to do with that one? So we cannot simply evacuate by taking other case in mind. And of course, Bitcoin is a central element in the crypto asset ecosystem. And that's why there is no intention to ban it at this stage within Europe. None of the action plan or regulation which have been unveiled recently are proposing it. But the question remains, And in a given way or the other, we'll have to address this question. So that's why, as part of the MiCA regulation, probably I will come back to a bit later to the different actions which have been announced. But there is this need of transparency. What does it mean? Indeed, what you say, we have to compare or to make transparent something that have to be understood in the relevant context. So this is something which is quite difficult. I hope that we can all together act in order to make it possible. But just to stress that as part of the discussion that we have for blockchain and sustainability, of course, the energy efficiency of blockchain system, which have to be appraised in the specific use case for which they are employed. But the Bitcoin case remains something that we have to take into account.
But if you want, we can go to the approaches by the different regions of the world of the question. You were starting to speak about that, but how? So in the EU, but maybe in other regions of the world, how governments, regulators are integrating the crypto asset sector in their environmental policies. What's the kind of approach? Is that positive? Is that negative? Is that more questions that are still on to solve? So Pierre, you started to speak about that. Would you like to complete, or maybe other want to react to what Pierre said?
About the different challenge.
So you were starting to speak about MiCA, how we had this question raised in the MiCA debates regarding the ban of proof of work. Finally, it's not. So what's going on in Europe, in MiCA, in other pieces of regulation about the environmental treatment of crypto asset activities?
But I mean, to reflect what we have started to discuss, I mean, we have one issue which is about clarifying if what is the energy consumption, whatever it means, or what is the energy efficiency of a crypto asset system solution. So it has been introduced as part of the MiCA regulation, and this part was introduced through the discussion with the Parliament. And indeed, there is now a request for being transparent about what is the climate impact, the carbon footprint of the different system. So in the context of, because I totally agree with you that we have to contextualize the things. In this context, it's about cryptocurrency platform, platform of exchange of cryptocurrency, etc., all those different technologies. So there is a need for this transparency. What is envisaged as part of the proposed MiCA regulation, which should be adopted in early 2023, is that the ESMA, the European Security and Market Agency, will propose an approach, which means regarding the content, the methodology, the presentation, for the type of requirements that will have to be provided. I think they have 1 year after the entry into force of the regulation to propose something like that. Then there will be report to be made by the Commission, an interim report 2 years later, and a full report 4 years later that will consider those aspects. So it means that it is clearly an invitation for all the community to work in order that this is not done in a way which is irrelevant, but that we can elaborate such a methodology or approach and those reports in a way which reflect what are the reality of the crypto asset economy. So we have, beside that, we have also, as part of the energy digitization of energy system action plan, we have also different elements. One is which make echo to the MiCA regulation, which is also to and probably there will be synergy between the two actions, is to elaborate a report about what is the energy consumption of the different blockchain or crypto asset solutions. There is a dedicated chapter for crypto asset technology in this action plan. So it means that to reflect what I said before, within the Commission, maybe not all of us, but there are colleagues who really wanted to spot those technology or those type of activities. And then, of course, there are other elements which are much more positive for the blockchain, or which open much more avenues to use blockchain in order to support more, let's say, local implementation of more energy efficient solution. For instance, by providing solution to share the renewable energy produced by a solar panel at a local level. So it's open a lot of opportunity for all of your let's say initiative to contribute to this ambition. And of course, in parallel of this MICA digitization of energy system action plan, we have also what concerns eco-design sustainable product regulation here, where we refer explicitly to the digital passport product, and we see here the use of blockchain or DLT technology in order to provide for the traceability of product or component within those products that to benefit to the circular economy in particular, but also to benefit to the creation of a data space that can help to build a lot of application with other technology like IA or metaverse or Web3 technology that will facilitate the exploitation of all those data. And here, clearly, I'm a big fan, if I can say that, of blockchain, because the key question is to secure the integrity of the data, the origin of the data, the evolution of the data, which reflect the evolution of the product in a way which is where we have trust in the system. And of course, as part of it, we have the identification of the different sources or the identification of the product itself. So that's where there is a fantastic opportunity of blockchain. And I discussed it just before the panel with Robert, that is probably the big new opportunity for blockchain technology to exploit. And you are all well placed for that. And in a way, it will compensate a little bit the bad image which have been created wrongly, probably, but about the too high energy consumption of blockchain or the high volatility or speculative aspect of the crypto asset market. So this is part of what the regulation at your level is always technology neutral. So we have no reference specifically to blockchain, at least in the regulation. We have reference to it in the action plan, but it creates a fantastic opportunity. Nothing will say that it will be done through blockchain or DLT, but I'm not going to learn to use that. It is clearly an opportunity. So that's the positive note that I see in our EU action. And maybe one of the lessons from this panel is that yes, blockchain can contribute to a sustainable policy for sure.
Would you have some recommendation in the context of the work that are being conducted by regulators, governments, EU institutions, in order to feed those works?
Sure, I can say a couple of things. I think, in fact, I cast my mind back to the conversations yesterday, and there was this discussion around should DeFi, DeFi protocols essentially kind of voluntarily regulate themselves so that we can see a better or more efficient integration with DeFi applications, with real world markets or TradFi markets, which I think is an interesting point. And what we've seen at KlimaDAO, so we're interacting with the voluntary carbon market. The voluntary carbon market is an unregulated market itself. And so our kind of primary stakeholders within that market are the carbon registries and the carbon standards themselves. They're looking at what's happening with the kind of boom of new crypto Web3 projects, looking at the carbon markets, looking at environmental assets, and they're definitely interested, but they do absolutely have concerns about what's happening, and in particular it's the KYC and the AML question. And so we're developing a solution whereby we think we can kind of satisfy their needs, where we'll, rather than having these permissioned pools, maybe we'll have or rather than having permissionless pools, maybe we'll have permissioned pools, which means if you want to trade the asset, you need to be KYC'd and go through the AML process. And if you just want to retire it, maybe you don't, because you're just kind of claiming the environmental benefit. So what we're seeing right now is we're seeing that we're kind of having to almost voluntarily regulate ourselves to, based on the needs of these stakeholders that we have, so that we kind of satisfy their needs. So yeah, just interesting what's happening within our space at the moment. We do want to keep integrating with this market. We think that there's a lot of value by integrating with this market, but we're gonna, if we want to work with off-chain or Web2 companies or whatever that you want to call them, we have to go through that process with them. So it'd be interesting to see how this kind of small microcosm of the space evolves over the next year. But to your point, Pierre, I think the digitizing the energy system directive is very interesting. It kind of looks at the merits of blockchain technology and how that can facilitate peer-to-peer energy trading, all these good things that we know it can do. And I think that's the kind of level that the conversation is starting to come to. We're starting to look at specific use cases based on their merits. I think the whole space is maturing, and I think it would just be really interesting to see that and I think environmental use cases are particularly compelling. I think they've got a good audience, people are interested. So we'll see how it matures. And I think, in general, letting the innovation happen and then trying to work with industry to properly regulate it so you don't stifle it, hopefully has some good benefits, at least from the environmental perspective.
Maybe one comment. For me, decentralization is all about digital sovereignty. So it's the ability to regain control over our data, whether we are a company or an individual. But more than that, it's to guarantee that no black box could take your data and play with it without your consentment. And I think it aligns the interest of regulators, individuals, and companies. Just because creating the condition for everyone to regain control over his data and his digital presence is the right tool actually to avoid having big tech centralizing everything. First of all, it's a good way to escape and to be free from the dependency on big tech first. And from the regulator side, and I really see the digital asset as personal data. So it's a way to represent personal data in a decentralized world. And I think that for regulators, it's also a good opportunity to have a better understanding on what's going on online. Because today, if you want to regulate, of course, you will write some rules. But if you want to make sure that those rules are applied and followed by companies, you will have to audit what's inside those black box. And we all know that given the size and the amount of data that are exchanged and computed on a daily basis, it's just impossible to know what's going on into Facebook database and where the data are stored. Plus, you have the data, the raw data, and those data are transformed into knowledge just because of algorithms. So you have no idea what's going on inside. So in a decentralized architecture, you don't have this centralized piece that you cannot audit in real time. You have the ability to audit the code that is running, because everything is open source, or at least it's open in access. And you have the ability to see how the processes works. So that means that if you edit the code, you know that the code will be executed the way it has to be executed, and no one can intercept and can be at the centerpiece modifying anything. So probably that from a regulatory perspective, the job to be done will slightly move from auditing companies and entities to auditing codes and making sure that the architecture and the design of a system comply with regulation. And that will just make sure that every single process of information will comply with this regulation.
Thank you, Fred. Do you want to add a recommendation?
I think you all have really good points. I love having invested a lot in renewable and energy efficiency in Europe and beyond throughout the years. I think this is a fantastic use case, particularly right now for Europe. Europe led the renewable energy revolution, I would say, and I think you can lead the integration of technology to make it even more efficient. So I'm excited to see that. Now, the only thing I would say is, I mean, at least for the companies that I work with and the climate NGOs that we engage with, clear rules are helpful. Like clear rules then we know where we can operate and we know what we are allowed to do and what we're not allowed to do. And I think that's really helpful. There's a lot of self-regulation. I'm seeing a lot of self-regulation in the US related to the voluntary carbon market, just because market trust and market credibility is the currency. If the market doesn't trust these new solutions, no one will buy them. So there's kind of that self-imposed regulation in a sense, but I think we're all better off if there are clear guardrails for how to operate. So I'm excited that the Commission is taking the lead here. I think that's really great.
We are nearly at the end of our debate. Does anyone want to add the final word? We did not have time to speak about the merge. I don't know if you want to add a few words in the last minutes or on any other topic.
If I can say, just to illustrate that even if we see a fantastic potential for blockchain for support the sustainability, any policies in favor of sustainability, there is one big challenge which remains, which is about interoperability. Because if we want to, let's say, through the digital passport product, for instance, create those data space and make those data space to be exploited by other technology that will help to really provide new type of system, decentralized system. I totally agree with your vision that for Europe, it's much better to think in terms of decentralized systems than to imagine too much centralization. We don't have the actors, and it will be probably a technology which is now outpassed, so in a way or the other. But the challenge is to create this interoperability, and so without maybe at this stage of the discussion opening too much the debate, but that remains a challenge. So an invitation for all the players in this room to contribute to interoperability.
We actually have a matrix that we just developed in my team outlining interoperability across chains, because most of our companies want to build across many different blockchains in many different countries, obviously, and make sure that they can reach and have bridges between them. So I don't know where I can place that link, but I'll place it somewhere with the organizers and maybe they can share that. I think that's just the beginning of it, but having a visualization of where the interoperability and inter and intra, I think we need to work on both inter and intra-operability across these chains, and then obviously markets and regulations. That's going to be really critical.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you. And so if you have any question, I think you will be available for a question after this panel. And so see you later to speak about this interesting topic. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Faustine. Thank you to our speakers for a great discussion on this super important topic of blockchain and sustainability. And thank you also again, Anna, for stepping in at the last minute and for providing great insights. And now we are still waiting for our MEP Eva Kaili to join us and provide the keynote speech that unfortunately she wasn't able to provide this morning. As we said, there was a bit of a change in schedule in the European Parliament, but that's the beauty again of doing these things in Brussels.